Hi, I'm Mark Seville. I'm the Vice President of Development for Laguna College of Art and Design. Group Y and LCAD created Creativity Flow to celebrate bold ideas, creative inquiry, and the intersections between design, technology, and human imagination. Our next guest embodies all those things. Tonight, we are honored to host Nick Foster, visionary designer, writer, and one of today's leading thinkers on how we imagine the future. Nick is a Royal Designer for Industry, one of the highest distinctions awarded by the Royal Society of Arts in the UK, recognizing his outstanding contributions to design and innovation. He has served as the head of Google X, working for their Moonshot factory, where he led multidisciplinary teams in robotics, AI, communication systems, and other projects that shaped the way we live and connect. A graduate of the Royal College of Art in London and a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts, Nick's work bridges industrial design, speculative storytelling, and strategic foresight. His practice, self-described as futures design, blends creativity with critical reflection, helping us not only picture what's next, but how we understand and think about it. Nick's new book, Could, Should, Might, Don't, How We Think About the Future, has been called an impassioned argument for replacing lazy certainties and fearful fantasies with rigorous, rationally optimistic thinking. The New York Times, Fast Company, and The Observer have all praised it for its accessible and thought-provoking take on how we may envision tomorrow. And we're going to explore many of those themes within the book tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please help join me in welcoming Nick Foster.
Hello, hello. You ready for a hard left now after beautiful illustrations into some hardcore tech talk? Here we go.
Well, let's start at the beginning, shall we?
Let's try.
So, Nick, you're a Derby lad,
Yes.
born in the industrial heart of the UK, about 2 hours away from where I was born in Liverpool.
Okay.
45 minutes away from where I spent a number of years of my life in the Stoke-on-Trent Market Drayton area. So, and all the Americans in the room are like, what? What is he talking about?
Still with us. You're still with us.
Yeah. So we have talked a lot about your family and your background, multiple generations who all kind of did, much of the same work in industry over time. And you very much kind of broke away from that and worked in creative fields. Where did you begin kind of exploring your creativity and your passion for design? Did it begin at a young age?
Yeah, absolutely. I come from 3 generations of railwaymen engineers. And I was born in the 70s, but I grew up in the 80s. And I was just fascinated by the future as a concept. I was kind of surrounded by it, I suppose, from Space Lego and, all of the movies that I like. Back to the Future came out in 85. So when I was 9 years old, so it was like perfect timing. I was lucky to find drawing and design as an outlet for that sort of curiosity, and then fortunate enough to turn that into a career. So yeah, drawing has been at the center of my practice forever. I'm just lucky to have been able to turn it into something where I can make a living.
So you leave Derby at 18 and you go to Brunel University.
Yeah.
Later earning your master's degree at the Royal College of Art, 2 institutions known for blending engineering and artistry. How were those years formative, and did they shape your creative philosophies?
Yeah, so my degree was a Bachelor of Science in Product Design. So it was very technical, very engineering-led, very sort of production-oriented, classic kind of industrial design work. Then I went to work for Dyson for a couple of years, which you might come back to. But then I went to the RCA, where I was suddenly surrounded by kind of art majors and people who did ceramics and all sorts of different things. Met my wife there, who was a fashion student at the time. So that kind of helped polish my critical acuity, my understanding of people, my understanding of history and those sorts of things. So I think those 2 things in parallel have led me to where I am today and the kind of work that I do. So I was kind of lucky to get both brackets in quite a short space of time.
So I think you had mentioned going into the Royal College of Art, you expected a lot of maker spaces and learning how to physically do things, but it was a lot more kind of intellectually driven, a lot more study of design and the implementation and practicality of it.
Yeah, I think it would probably get accused of being a school for lazy people today. There wasn't really much of a curriculum to speak of. It was mostly staffed by practicing designers and creative artists who taught for maybe 1 or 2 days a week. I think that was part of the stipulation, certainly on the course that I studied, which meant that there wasn't a lot of structure. But what there was a lot of time. It was a 2-year master's degree. So we had a lot of time to sit down and talk and discuss and kind of make fun of each other's work and learn how to debate and crit, the art of critting work. Is what I developed at the Royal College. So yeah, I think that sort of freedom and that space, you weren't always working to a deadline. There was a lot of time to sit around and chat and recommend books to each other and read things together and, build that critical acuity.
Any mentors or friends from those years that you carried on into industry?
Yep. So when I was doing my first degree in 1996, I did we would call a placement, but I guess you'd call an internship in America at Pentagram, where I bumped into a guy called Peter Russell Clark, who's an Australian fella. His father was a celebrity chef in Australia for a long time. He just passed away, unfortunately. Anyway, I met this chap there, and then I went to the Royal College of Art, where he was my tutor. And then when I came to America in 13 years ago, we reconnected again, where he was an industrial designer at Apple. So he's been a figure in my life through the whole thing. But in terms of mentors, at the Royal College of Art, I met Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby. I don't know if those names mean anything to anyone, but they kind of founded the critical and speculative design movement in the UK, which has just fundamentally changed how I do my practice and how I do my work. And they're good friends today.
Oh, wonderful. So were there moments early in your career that gave you a sense of how design could go beyond form and function to influence culture, human behavior, and ultimately how we view the world?
Look at that. That's an impressive way to start, isn't it? A washing machine. Anyway.
It's beautiful.
You're welcome. That gearbox was the first physical thing I designed that made it onto the market. So I guess that's why that's here. But a gearbox, everybody. Right. Yeah, I guess the reason this is up is because I did start from a very kind of pragmatic engineering background, but that balance of art and design that I grew over my career has helped me sort of approach very pragmatic questions with a pragmatic mindset and an ability to sort of deliver product, but also an ability to understand people and culture and the way that those two things overlap, which I think gives me quite a significant advantage in the work that I've done over the last certainly 10 years.
So speaking of early in your career, was there a pivot point, either professionally or personally, when you realized that design is a vehicle by which we can see the future itself? Or did that come later over time?
I mean, I'm getting towards 50, so it's taken a long time and a lot of self-reflection to get to this point. I think so. I don't think I noticed it at the time. I don't think there was ever oh, here's this moment where I'm suddenly aware of what design can do I just really enjoyed it. I like drawing. I like making things. I like making little films. I like producing, sketching, prototyping, and suddenly realized that wasn't something that everybody did. And suddenly realized, it's quite a superpower, actually, when you're trying to talk about what the world might look like in 5 years hence, or what products we might make, or what life might be like in 10 years hence. So yeah, I think over my career, I would say that's gradually filtered into my brain, but it's not something that I ever had that click moment when it all made sense.
So let's speak of the evolution of your career. So your early career included roles at Dyson, Sony, Nokia, Apple, companies known for radically different approaches to innovation. What did you learn from working across those cultures and how they designed, or is their design, how their designs were valued or sometimes misunderstood given the timing?
Yeah, I think when you say design, as we've shown tonight with just two speakers, it's such a huge gamut of things. And everywhere that I've worked has had a different culture and a different attitude and a different understanding of what design is and what it can do and when it comes in the process and all those things. Some of that's due to the country and the culture. So these are products that I worked on for Sony. And that was spending a lot of time in Japan, which has its own idea of what design is. The gearbox that you saw before was a product that I made for Dyson, which is a very sort of inventy, English, eccentric kind of company. The work that I've done at Google and Apple and other places has been very kind of Silicon Valley and technocratic. So you have to try and find ways to talk about your work in different environments with different sorts of people who have different kinds of priorities. But essentially, it's the same kind of work through and through. It's just sort of how you frame it, when you do it, and how you aim it.
Mm. So many people know your later work through Google X, where you helped lead moonshot projects. Could you share what it means to design at that scale, where the challenge isn't just making something beautiful, but making something possible?
Yeah. While this is playing, because we might skip on from it, this is the world's biggest zoetrope that I designed for a Sony advert, just so that anybody knows what it is.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big old thing. It was actually a repurposed fairground ride, but yeah, it was quite as scary as it span round very quickly in front of people. Anyway, that was for an advert. What was the question?
What is the, could you share what it means to design at the scale of,
Oh,
you know,
yes.
Google X and Moonshot?
Yeah, so Google X is very much focused on trying to take big swings, technological big swings. And I think trying to think at that scale, there is no beginning, middle, and end. There's no clear deliverable when you're starting that kind of work. And the kind of work that I'm talking about is, you know, trying to think about the future of space travel or the future of how robotics might fit into the home or whatever it is. So they're big, ambitious projects.
The Moonshot project.
The Moonshot projects, there you go, it's well named. And you just sort of have to try. I would say I'm not a disciplinary purist. Like I draw, but I also make films. I also make fake advertisements. I make prototypes, hardware prototypes, software prototypes. I write a lot. And so I don't have a discipline. And I think that flexibility allows me to approach questions like what is the future of space travel, or how might we build this self-driving car, for example. You can just sort of pull on that grab bag of skill sets and say, well, I think what might benefit us most here is a little film, for example, a little storytelling, or let's test that and build a UX prototype or something. So being able to skip between disciplines for me is the only way you can approach this type of work. If you just come and you say, I'm just an animator, like if animation doesn't make sense at that moment or to answer that part of the question, then you're sort of useless at that point. So being able to shift between different skill sets is what the only way to approach those kind of big questions.
So just giving our audience a little bit of background here on Google X, how does it function and fall into kind of the alphabet soup of companies that are Google?
Yeah, so officially Google X is not a part of Google, it's part of Alphabet. So Alphabet is the holding company and Google is the big gorilla in the room. But next to Google is, say, Waymo, which many of you might know, the self-driving car company. So our job at Google X was to make not new things for Google, but new Googles. So new big billion-dollar businesses for Alphabet. So that is where Waymo came from, was from Google X. And we were part of the foundational team that helped develop some of the thinking there, as with Google Brain, that then went on to become some of the LLM and machine learning projects that came out of Google. So yeah, it's a separate building. It's separate from Google proper. It has its own key cards and its own team, its own budget. So it's very much separate from Google. In fact, its actual name is X, the Moonshot Factory, but we colloquially call it Google X. But yeah, it's a separate sort of lab, basically, to do exploratory, experimental, future-oriented projects.
Does someone tell you what to explore, or is it, do you have the free charge to just tackle the world's biggest problems?
Good question. No, nobody tells you. There's clearly a spirit of exploring as many things as possible concurrently. So while I was there, I was head of design there for about 7.5 years. I think we worked on probably 200 investigations. And I would say 99% of them didn't make it out of the building. So it's a very iterative, exploratory, let's look at this, let's look at that. Somebody will have an idea for an application of a technology that somebody hasn't thought of before. And then our job as designers and creative people is to say, right, what can we do quickly to see if either they're correct, or if there's a there, or if there's a business there, or if it works. The other thing would be, we would look at a big challenge or a problem and say, how might we approach that? And bring a bunch of smart people into the room and say, well, we could try this, we could try that, we could try this, and then start prototyping on top of that. So there's not really a big agenda, but they're all the sorts of things you might imagine. You know, poverty, world hunger, energy, those are the sort of big challenge areas. Also, somebody says, wouldn't it be great if we had like a CMYK for smells? You know, if there's a way to categorize smells, like an RGB value, for example. That's an interesting idea. Let's look at that. So we go and prototype things and look at things like that. So it's very broad and it's very varied, but the aim is to try and prove something out, explore it, and get to a no as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible.
Some are varied, but some are very ambitious in nature. How do you balance ambition and practicality in design? And do those things often find themselves in conflict?
Yeah, I think any type of big ranging project that I've tackled in the last 15 years is a long journey from sort of audacity to pragmatism. You have to start with a big ambition because inevitably the edges will get knocked off and reality will come knocking and price will come knocking and manufacturability will come knocking. So you gradually work your way down this sort of from dream to reality. Um, I think going into pragmatic, it's always a downhill slope and you can end up a little bit underwhelmed. So you have to start off ambitious and you have to start off at a very kind of, a high desire point. But yeah, things gradually get knocked off as you work through these kinds of projects.
So you've been a major voice in the way that we approach futures design, as we've mentioned, bridging pragmatism with an often ambitious optimism. Yet you've also warned us to envision the future as it is, not as we've been taught it should be. Could you share with us the dangers of seeing the future through a homogeneous lens, and how can designers overcome this bias?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I've written this book, and maybe we'll talk about it some more, is I've been around people talking about the future for 25 years in a formal like job environment, and nobody's very good at it. And what I mean by very good at it is nobody does it with enough balance or rigor or depth. And so the reason the book exists is to try and tackle that, not to make a recommendation of the future as I see it or what my reckons are or my mega trends or any of that rubbish. It's about going one step lower and saying, whenever any of us think about the future, what happens first? Because I think we jump straight into ideas and straight into solutions and straight into recommendations. So I think the challenge that I have with thinking about the future is that we just don't have that framework underneath our ideas. So it all just becomes this big kind of mess of concepts and stuff just flies at us from left and right. So I don't think we have a language or developed a language to tackle these kind of conversations with sufficient depth.
So let's lean into that a little bit farther through the lens of your work with the Near Future Laboratory, and your theory on future mundane. Could you share a little bit about your work with the Near Future Lab and how future mundane informs your approach with design?
Yeah. So in the first part of my career, I did a lot of kind of thirsty, energetic, sci-fi inflected design futures work because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. That's what all the magazines showed me anyway. And then I would go back home to Derby and go out for a pint with my dad and sort of think, what was all that about? That doesn't make sense in this place at all. And so what I wanted to start doing was looking at what I call background talent, which is when you see them, when the credits roll on a movie and you see all the heroes and the stars at the top and you go lower and lower and lower and you get down to what they call background talent or extras or supernumeraries or NPCs. I think we need to start thinking about the future through their eyes and our eyes because we're all sort of NPCs. None of us are really heroes. And I think when you start to think about the future as a lived-in place occupied by ordinary, everyday people, whatever that might mean, I think you start to think about the future with much more depth, and all the coulds and the shoulds and the mights and the don'ts start to feel tangible and real as opposed to abstract and lofty or fanciful. And so The Future Mundane was an essay that I wrote 12, 13 years ago now that just caught on and became this sort of meme about thinking about the future as a lived-in ordinary place where we still go to 7-Elevens and where we still walk the dog and where we still get a twisted knee. And I think when you're talking about things like whatever it is, VR or any kind of future technology, don't talk about it like a Tom Cruise gestural interface or somebody, fixing a broken heart in VR space. Talk about how people actually use these things and think about it in a backpack, on a bus, on a wet street. Those are the kinds of ways I like to think and talk about the future.
Interesting. So of all the projects you've worked on, could you describe a favorite one that embodied how speculative design challenged assumptions, inspired new thinking, and/or ambitiously sought to tackle a global issue?
Cool, that's a big one. Yeah, I think so. There was a project I worked on a while ago that if any of you are interested, you can find it on YouTube. So we were working at Google on a project about unfettered access to user data. Very, very tricky territory, especially at the time I was working on it. And in that kind of project, you get a lot of kind of wavering, fluctuating opinions. People get radically excited and radically anxious and, they dream and they get scared and it's all over the place. So I set out to make a movie with a few friends where we went from kind of benign versions of this technology all the way up to perhaps the most scary dystopian versions of the kinds of products that might exist if Google had unlimited access to your data. And then we played that back to the team and said, at what point do you become uncomfortable and why? So it gave people a framework to talk about the technology and the state of the world. And we had a meaningful debate about it. The reason why I think it's important and interesting is that project was then filed away. And about 3 years later, the press team at Google came running to me saying, what is this project? What did you do this for? Because somebody in another part of Google had found the film and leaked it to the press and thought that it was a pitch for what we wanted to produce. So my creative work was seen as like a bid for where I thought we should go. And obviously it made its way onto The Verge and then onto Fox News, and my face was on InfoWars and all this kind of stuff. So I felt like I was this close to losing my job. And I think I might have been. But very quickly, the people around me and the press team and the security team and the data teams all said, actually, no, this is your job. Your job is to use creative tools to help us have these discussions internally and figure out where our compass should point. And so for me, that was real affirmation of the work and the power of creative output, because it really did help us have that conversation and stop us doing 10, 12 months of, iterative loops of imagination. It said, no, this is where we think the line is. So while it was very scary at the time, and I did fear for my career and thought I'd made a huge mistake, actually it reaffirmed in me that design has such a strong power to really like galvanize people's opinion. So I think that's probably the best example.
And you had mentioned to me at Google, if you were going to fail, you were encouraged to fail, but fail quickly in order to save as much money as possible, but also learn invaluable lessons along the way. And I suppose from this, some valuable lessons were learned.
Absolutely. Double password protect was one of the lessons I learned. Anyway, no, I think getting to a no quickly, not just for financial reasons, but just also for intellectual rigor reasons, like figuring out something and prototyping something and then trying to figure out if there's a there that suits Google's ambitions. You've got to get there quickly, because otherwise you can spend 10 months saying, oh, what if we tried this? Or what if we tried that? If it's not going to work, put a pin in it, save it, learn what you've learned and move on to the next thing.
So can you walk us through the evolution of your career? So you started Dyson, go get your master's degree. Where do you jump from there?
I did the formative years actually after the Royal College of Art were in design consulting. So working for clients, everything from FMCG, designing new razors for Gillette or new concept cars for Jaguar or something like that. It's really good fun, but it felt very transactional. Like a company would come and say, hey, can you tell us the future of sharing chocolate or whatever, something like that. And you do a project and it was fun, but it didn't seem to go anywhere. It didn't seem to lead anywhere. So I decided that in-house, to use the parlance of our times, was the place for me, where I could sit with the engineers and the scientists who were building things. And there was no deliverable end date, typically. It was, let's explore. So I then moved into Sony and spending time in a really powerful electronics brand like that, working with people who spent a lot of time developing some of the formative technologies of my childhood, mini disc and PlayStation and these kinds of, these were brands that I had strong love for. And then being asked to imagine what the future of those things might be, it's just a dream job. So I spent a bunch of time at Sony. Then I moved to Nokia. Who remembers them? Anyone? Hey. Just for reference, all Americans, it's Nokia, not Nokia. Just want to make that clear. So I joined there, and I was part of their advanced design team, and we were working on emerging technology. So this was a camera that we were actually developing for Nokia at the time, not a phone, which was a whole new product category for them, which was exciting. Spent a bunch of time working in London, and then came over to Silicon Valley to help establish the advanced design studio there. And then from there moved to Google, from Google to Google X. And then I left Google X in 2023 to have a break, re-meet my wife, and write a book. Yeah.
Well, perfect segue, thank you, into the book. So could, should, might, don't, let's talk about the book. You said that it's not a book about the future, but about how we think about the future. Could you elaborate on that and tell us what inspired you to write it and why now?
Cool. Look at that exploded diagram. Sorry. Yes. Could, should, might, don't. It is my reflection on thinking about the future professionally for the last 25 years. And I think, like I said, we don't have a good set of language about talking about the future. And I think what we tend to do when anybody talks about the future down the pub or in work, they tend to rush towards one of those four words: the could, the should, the might, or the don't. And I think each of them has their own strengths and each of them has their own history, but each of them also has quite significant weaknesses that we either ignore or aren't aware of. And so, what I decided to write this book about is just trying to encourage people to reconsider when they're asked to think about the future. What happens? What are the things they reach for? Is it data? Is it a manifesto of how they want the world to be? Is it things that they're scared of? Is it dystopias? Is it multiple scenarios? Is it game theory? Is it strategy? Like, what are the things? And trying to put some structure there. Because I think whenever any of us are confronted with an idea about the future or a story about the future, it's typically very imbalanced and it comes from one of these four corners. And I think in order to talk about the future more rigorously, we need to find a balance between all four of those.
Now, you've also talked about the pitfalls of envisioning the future through a singular lens, right? And I actually took you up on something that you had mentioned in one of your previous talks, which is if you Google image kind of the words futuristic,
Yeah.
you get a very kind of homogeneous view of what that future looks like.
Yeah.
Where does that come from? Why are we so informed by it? And how do we break ourselves out of the paradigm?
Yeah, I mean, it's slightly changing now just with the shape of the world and the shape of concerns. But for the longest time, if you go to Google image searches and type the future, or particularly futuristic as a word search, you'll get the same sort of science fiction cinema inflected stuff that we've been seeing for 40 to 50 years, all typically illuminated in purple and blue or white. And it's all the sort of crystal cities and the flying cars and the magical gadgets, and it's comes from a language of science fiction cinema. Now, science fiction, everybody assumes I'm a huge science fiction fan because I work in the future of technology. The opposite is true. I first saw Star Wars in the 90s. Don't hate me. It's not something I see anything in beyond entertainment. Just my take. Other people have different takes. But in Silicon Valley and in technology and in the future of technology, science fiction cinema has an absolutely outsized weight. And I think it affects the ways that we're able to imagine the future. It affects the language we use to talk about the future. And a lot of people, a lot of the world's most powerful people, kind of lean lazily on the ideas and the images and the language of science fiction to describe the future they want to achieve. And I think we really need to be honest about that and address that. Because, again, I think it takes us into what I call could futurism way too deeply, which is this sort of childlike boyhood science fiction imagination land, which can be good for getting people excited, but there's not a lot of there, and it's very sort of regurgitative and very repetitive.
And you said, in your talk that, most of those images are funded by marketing budgets, not by design teams necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. It's designed to get people to click. They're kind of thirsty images designed to sort of draw people onto your stand at a trade show or get people to click your story. They don't actually act on them. Like, I don't know marketing and I don't know engineering and science teams that would produce images like that. It is a marketing and communications kind of way of talking about the future, I think.
So the title of the book is wonderfully simple but deeply conceptual. Could you walk us through each of those four words and why you chose them? Could, should, might, and don't.
I
What
can.
do they each represent?
There's 80,000 words to cover them here, so I'll be very quick. So could futurism is the very excited, this is what we could do in the future. The future could be all these things. It's very good because it builds excitement and it builds sort of momentum about the future and positivity, but it is often inflected with a lot of science fiction cinema and a lot of science fiction language. And I think that that can actually restrict our imaginations, and we can use the ideas of science fiction as sort of lazy placeholders for real independent thought. So that's could futurism. Should futurism is more about being certain about the future somehow. And that can come from a lot of different places, from religious dogma or ideology. But more recently and more popularly, it comes from data and viewing the world as a system or an algorithm to be decoded. And once we can see a chart or a map of a line, it becomes almost impossible to resist projecting it forwards. And the solid line turns into a dotted line and becomes a confident dot in the future. So you see this a lot in corporate strategy and finance and things like that. The things that people forget is that once the solid line converts into a dotted line, it stops being data and it becomes a story. And actually the future is just a genuinely volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous place. So might futurism is the opposite of that, which is about looking at the future as a territory of exploration, lots of different scenarios. It's like playing chess, and this is where I talk a lot about game theory and scenario planning that came out in the Cold War, for example. So we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. If I do this, they might do that. And it's this sort of branching decision tree, which is kind of good because it encourages you to think laterally. But the problem is our imagination about the future and potential future scenarios is nowhere near as good as we think it is. And if you look at brain scans of somebody in an MRI machine and you ask them to imagine the future, exactly the same parts of the brain light up as if you ask them to imagine the past, which is sort of a medical way of saying our imagination is only as good as the things we've previously experienced, which is why magic tricks work. If somebody pulls something out of an empty box, it's not because it's magic, it just breaks our model of experience. So that's might futurism. You still with me? Don't futurism is a way of looking at the future through a negative lens, trying to identify all the places we don't want to go. Religion does a good job of this in things like hell and purgatory, but also our moral standards say we don't want to go here, we don't want to go there. It's where opposition politics comes from, pointing out all the flaws in where we might go to, which again has been on the rise in recent years, and people are expecting more responsibility from their companies and their institutions. The challenge with it is if you spend too long in the don't camp, or just spend your time in the don't camp, it can become crippling, and you can start to think about the world as this awful, foreboding place. Especially young people are suffering with this a lot. There's this term ambient adolescent apocalypticism that we've been reading a lot about. Young people are looking to the future and not liking what they see, and it can really kind of be significantly detrimental to their mental well-being. So that was my little piece. Could, should, might, don't.
How can individuals or organizations begin to think about the future then more critically and creatively, kind of given the things that you describe in the book?
I don't think it's whether they can. I think it's that they must. I really believe this strongly, and I kind of would say that because it's my industry, but I do think it's going to be a central part of any successful business in the future is to have much more rigorous conversations about where everything is heading. I think the pace of change is accelerating so quickly, and the quantity of change and the magnitude of that change is changing so significantly that not having a rigorous foresight and futures arm of your business is going to be a critical weakness in business in the future. Now, I understand that that comes from a privileged place, and a lot of companies and a lot of individuals don't have the time and the luxury and the money to have a lab or a separate team or even the time to do this work. It still holds true to me, though, that I think we need to start prioritizing these kinds of conversations. However we do that, even if it's just at the end of every meeting, carving off 5 minutes to say, and then what? And what might that lead to? Or what's the bad outcome that we haven't thought about? Even that can fundamentally change how a company stops thinking about week-to-week returns or quarterly returns or yearly returns or whatever it is. I think we need to get out of that cycle because we're sort of stumbling into the future and then constantly surprised by where we find ourselves. And I think we need to grow out of that.
Now, of the many glowing endorsements on the back of the book, one is from Questlove, which is... I'm a big fan.
Good, good.
So he describes it as a light bulb over your head that just never goes off. So through that lens, what do you hope that your readers, or maybe specifically the students from LCAD here with us today, what do you hope that they take away from the book if they read it?
It's nice that I got that from Questlove. What a nice man. Yeah, I could have written a kind of technical academic book for other futures practitioners, other futures designers, and gone through like MIT Press or something like that. I deliberately didn't write that book. I wrote a mass appeal kind of, with all humility, like a Malcolm Gladwell type of book. And I think the reason I did that is, firstly, it's better for sales. But I think the main problem that I have, I don't call myself a futurist, is where it sort of stems from, because I think a lot of people that do call themselves a futurist are kind of charlatans, and there's a lot of snake oil, and the work just isn't very good. It's a lot of people standing on stages telling you that curves are going like this and numbers are going like that, and here are the mega trends, and it feels very naive. So I could just talk to those people and say, your work needs to improve, sorry. But I think the stronger thing is to enable everybody to feel like they've got the language to critique this work and become better consumers of the futures that they're told or sold, and actually raise their hand and say, this just feels like a strident piece of could futurism, or this feels really imbalanced. So what I hope people take away from it is that everybody has a role in the future. They will hopefully exist in the future, and they have an absolute right and a duty to question and query the futures that they're being told and they're sold. And I want them to feel confident to do that.
Now, through that lens, I was hoping that maybe we could kind of tell the audience here in a few minutes some of the work that you were doing through that lens at Google X to tackle some of the most pressing issues of humanity today, and how design was playing an integral role in the application of that. Could you just tell us some of the most ambitious projects that you were working on while you were at Google X?
I mean, they were all ambitious. 90% of them are still very secret. But I think something like self-driving cars, for example, Waymo, that we're starting to see on lots of our streets. I was a skeptic of that project when I joined Google X. It was already rolling as a project when I joined. I just felt that the technological leap was too high. I thought the societal barriers were too high. But in San Francisco, which is across the water from where I live, Waymo vehicles are now sort of a normal thing. They've become mundane, to use my language. Like, people use them every day and sort of don't really even talk about it anymore. And for me, that's just staggering, because every single second that they're on the road, they're doing amazing things culturally and technologically. And I think that there's something in that to say you can take these big swings, and if you're tenacious enough, and if you're careful enough, and if you ask the right questions at the right time, you can actually bring about quite significant change in the world. So something like the self-driving car that I didn't work on almost at all, but out of that crucible comes things like that. There was another project we worked on called Tara, which was trying to use, instead of laying fiber optic cables or stringing internet cables between remote towns, we fire laser beams between 2 points and use it almost like a Morse code thing, and self-aligned mirrors. So particularly in rural areas like India, being able to beam the internet from one place to another place through line of sight. It's just amazing. Like, it's the technology that, without going to space or without going underground.
And was this the one that you were using hot air balloons for?
Yeah, so it grew out of the project that was just up here earlier, which was a project called Loon, where we were trying to put satellites in low Earth orbit on helium balloons and use them to transmit the internet down onto the people below who needed it or wanted it. That project ultimately didn't yield the results we wanted. So we took the core technologies, or a team did, I wouldn't say we, a team took the core technologies and repurposed them and said, there's still something there, and we can repurpose it into this new type of product, which is now successful, and it's spun out of Google X and become its own standalone business.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to take a look back and then a look ahead. For emerging artists and designers, many of whom are here with us tonight, what advice would you give them about cultivating curiosity, criticality, and courage in their creative journeys? And is there something that you've learned along the way that you wish you had known earlier in your career?
Yeah, all of it. I think, like I said, I don't know whether it's a midlife crisis or something, but I've become very reflective over the last 5 years. And particularly on my career and the things that I've done. I think for the first half of my career, like I said, I was just doing the stuff that I thought I was supposed to do. The role had a title like designer or futures designer, whatever it was, and I thought you were supposed to deliver a certain type of thing. And I kind of did that, and I made a living, and I got jobs, and it all was fine, but it didn't hit me here, really. It was just sort of earning money and trying to please the boss. And I think the thing that I wish I'd learned earlier is be more confident in yourself. Like, be more brave in what you think, and be honest. You know, when you're being honest, it comes across as confidence, and that can be a superpower. And I learned that way too late, because I was too busy trying to please people who would set me briefs or clients or earn the money or whatever it was. And I think that learning, I wish had come a bit earlier, but I felt like I had too much to lose. You know, I had to pay my rent, I had student debts to pay, and I just wanted to say the things that would keep everyone around me happy. I have that sort of people pleaser problem. But as I got a bit more confident and started to raise my hand and say, oh, are we sure about this, really? Like, suddenly people leant in and said, oh, actually, it's good that you said that. But I think that came way too late in my career. Not that it's over, but, you know, like, it felt like I should have done that earlier. So if anyone's a student here, be confident in asking questions earlier and being a bit honest about what you really think, because it's very easy to just nod your head and do what the boss says. And there's a time to do that, obviously, but I wish I'd done that earlier.
Now, going from being a creative to being a leader of creative people, what's that transition like? And are there any keys to leadership, good leadership that you've learned along the way?
The transition is horrible. For me, as a pure, I grew up drawing cartoons, drawing Garfield. I just like to draw. That's it. And it sort of turned into this career and then in a leadership role. I think I'm a pretty good leader of people. I care about people. I care about their personal development. I care about having diverse inputs into creative acts. So I like building teams. But the drawing and the thinking always wins. So when I started to build the creative team at Google X, for example, I think I did a pretty good job. I mean, you could talk to some of the people in the team. Maybe they'd give you different reviews, but I think I did a pretty good job. But one thing that I did do was sort of hire somebody into like a chief of staff role who was much more focused on helping manage people, which sort of freed me up a bit more to do the thing I was actually probably a bit better at, which is thinking creatively, being a creative leader and helping give sort of design feedback as opposed to career development feedback. So I think that knowing yourself, again, trying to be honest and not trying to act the role of a manager, if it's not in you or it's not your passion to do it, find ways around it, find ways to manage it. And I think I would do that again if I was leading a large creative team, which is not something I think I would run towards. But if I'd found myself there, I think finding the balance of that team and finding somebody that can help manage that well and create a balance of leadership and everybody knows who to go to for different kinds of questions. I think that's an important learning.
It's actually brilliant advice and very introspective, which, may come with experience. But speaking of running toward, how do you think about your own future now? And, what's next for Nick Foster? Are there any ambitious global issues that you would love to tackle with limitless funds and a cadre of brilliant designers by your side?
Yeah, I'm going snorkeling in Indonesia next week, so that's on the cards. I'm very excited about that. No, I think there's something quite interesting here that I feel is worth broaching, is that I don't have a personal manifesto of how I think the world should be. I don't have a sort of burning desire to shape the world in my image or bring my ideas to bear on other people. And some people might say that's a failing and I should use my power to good or whatever it is. I think I work really well in a sort of drafting position behind somebody who's got a strong vision, and I can help them build that and help be the scaffolding to help propel them forwards. I just feel like maybe growing up in a kind of upper working class, lower middle class family in the UK, I've never felt it was like my job to stand on stage and say, hey, everyone, this is the world that we're going to build and follow me, people. It just doesn't feel right to me or natural to me. But I do tend to gravitate towards people that have a strong idea of either an interesting or curiosity about an interesting technology or a problem they want to tackle. And then the next layer below that is, do they have an ethical backbone? Do they do it in the right way? Do they have a sort of right attitude? And if those things are in place, I'm right on board.
Amazing advice. So, Nick, thank you so much for sharing your insights, experience, and perspectives with us this evening. What's so inspiring about your work and the book is that it reminds us that design is not about things, but it's about thinking. It's about the world we build, the stories we tell, and the values that we use to live by that shape tomorrow. For our students, faculty, and community at Laguna College of Art and Design, your ideas challenge us to use creativity, not as an escape, but as a tool for greater engagement, to meet uncertainty with imagination, empathy, and responsibility. So on behalf of LCAD Group Y and our audience here today, I want to thank you for your generosity of time and for the clarity that you brought to how we may approach the future, thoughtfully, courageously, and with great care. We sincerely appreciate you joining us, and I would encourage everyone in the audience today, please go pick up the book, Could, Should, Might, Don't. It really is a wonderful read, available both here in bookstores and online. Let's have a final hand for our guest tonight, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you.